KwaZulu-Natal on high alert amid fears of more looting and unrest after a court ruling that former President Jacob Zuma must return to jail. Now, some of Zuma's supporters are threatening to repeat what we saw in July, and they say the courts are being used as political tools to destroy him. Both Zuma and the Correctional Services Department are appealing the ruling. Let's get more reaction. We're joined by the ANC Secretary in KwaZulu-Natal, Mr. Mdumiseni Ntuli, who joins us now. Mr. Ntuli, thank you very much for your time. Can I start by premising the day that we are observing today? It is a day of reconciliation, and yet you have a security cluster, ministers, a group of ministers who are worried about the state of safety of citizens of the country, the economy, and just general stability of the country. On the back, Mr. Ntuli, on the back of a decision that has been taken by a court to say to the former president, who once swore allegiance to the Constitution, that he must return to jail because the decision to allow him out on medical parole was unlawful. How, as the ANC in KwaZulu-Natal, do you reconcile the fact that you have a day of reconciliation that's being observed versus threats to the stability of the country, all because there's a former president who is being instructed to go back to jail?
Well, thank you very much, Toli. Good morning to you and good morning to the viewers of News Africa 405. I think, firstly, I think it's important from the point of view of the ANC that we must congratulate the liberation fighters who led to the liberation of this country, whose 60th anniversary is being celebrated today, the formation of Umkhonto Sizwe. And of course, a day that over a period of time after 1994, the democratic state declared as a reconciliation day. We believe that it's important that we must honor those who came before us in terms of the liberation of our country. We do accept that we have not yet arrived at the place that is desired for our country in terms of achieving absolute unity and the reconciliation of all our people. And that remains a struggle, and it's a challenge that I think those of us who are privileged to be in leadership must always ensure that we mobilize and galvanize society towards the attainment of that objective. On the issue that is in question, the decision of the court yesterday, we were in the meeting of the Provincial Executive Committee of the ANC, a 3-day meeting which began on Monday and ended later yesterday. And of course, while we were in the meeting, we saw this judgment coming out in the headlines. Our own view is that we took a position in July to oppose and to disagree with the Concord decision. We believe that position was correct, and that position, as you would know, originated from a number of considerations. One amongst them was that the court itself, through its own majority judgment at the time, considered the fact that there was a slight departure from what is normally done in dealing with the cases of this nature, as a consequence of which that majority judgment disregarded completely, almost entirely, the minority perspective in terms of handling the matter differently. Our own view is that what happened yesterday originates from that mishandling of that process, which of course, as we know now, resulted to an unrest, a huge destabilization of the province and some parts of Gauteng, and of course, the looting, and most painfully, the loss of life of many of our fellow South Africans, whose lives, in our view as the ANC, could have been protected, and they were not going to die, in our own view, had it not been the developments which emanated from the Concord. So what are we going to, and that Concord judgment, as you might recall, if you don't, we'll give you some example, was to a greater extent littered with emotions from Chief Justice, Deputy Chief, the acting Chief Justice at the time, Kampempe. And more and above that, she also wrote a letter issuing an instruction to government to say that when Zuma is arrested, he must be incarcerated in this particular facility. Something that was unheard of, something that, and of course we were happy that the Correctional Services Department did not accede to that strange instruction from a judge, which in our own view confirmed that indeed there was something beyond what the judgment was all about. Now let me come to the latest developments now. The Medical Parole Board said, firstly, it considered the document from one of its own, Dr. Mapatwe. Dr. Mapatwe said, in terms of the decision, that the recommendation that he made, and is part of that parole board, says the circumstances and the sickness of former President Zuma are of such a nature that the correctional facilities would not be in the position to deal with it. And that was subsequently confirmed and supported by what is called a report of the Surgeon General. Now, all of us know that beyond those two reports, which of course were not accepted by the Medical Parole Board, using their own discretion, of course, in that direction. But ultimately, soon after that, former President Zuma was taken away from the correctional services facilities to be hospitalized somewhere in Pretoria. Why was that done? That was done because, correctly as it was pointed out by the two medical practitioners, that the facilities where he was kept, or none of the facilities in the country, were in the position actually to ensure that the conditions that he's suffering from is properly taken care of and is properly dealt with.
All right.
Now, when the National Commissioner exercised the discretion, because we agreed with that position, firstly because we thought, if the two doctors have made this point and the Commissioner says, yes, you have made a recommendation, but I disagreed with the recommendation. And then he articulated a number of reasons for doing that. So we thought that was the best decision going forward.
All right. Mr. Ntuli, we're going to ask for your indulgence here. It is nearly 10 o'clock, and hopefully you can stay with us, and I can already sense that you are agreeing that this conversation is not yet done. So what we're going to do is to put you on pause, and then after the 10 o'clock headlines, I'm going to bring into the conversation my colleague Ziyanda Ngcobo, and we're going to continue the conversation. We are in conversation with the KwaZulu-Natal Secretary of the African National Congress, Mdumiseni Ntuli, and we're talking to him on the back of the High Court decision in Pretoria, which has said that the decision to release former President Jacob Zuma on medical parole was unlawful. However, this decision is now being appealed by the Zuma Foundation alongside the Correctional Services Department. All right, let's bring Mr. Ntuli back into the conversation. Mr. Ntuli, thanks for staying with us. In the main here, Mr. Ntuli, are the implications or the ramifications of what could occur on the back of this decision of the court. And a little earlier, you would have heard the ministers of the security cluster saying that the attacks on the judiciary are not going to help, but more importantly, they are calling for calm. And this is more so for your province, Mr. Ntuli, which saw the destruction that we saw in July, including here in Gauteng. There are already statements coming out of the Youth League, for example, in the Musa Dladla region, which is where the former president's homestead is located. And they are, quote-unquote, dismayed by this decision. And again, the attacks on judges continues. Your message as the leadership of the ANC in KwaZulu-Natal against these kinds of sentiments?
Well, you see, Toli, the ministers of the security and the justice cluster were quite correct. It's a position of the National Liberation Movement that we should not fall into a temptation of leading an offense or an attack on our judiciary, because it is part of our architecture in terms of building this national democratic society that we aspire for and for which we are working for. But that does not mean that judges are immune from criticism. And I think South Africans will have to be made to understand a distinction between criticism and an attack. What I said earlier on, for instance, about the conduct of the Concord, and particularly as it was represented by Justice Kambembe, cannot, in a rational society, constitute an attack on the judiciary. By the way, as an example to you, there's a litany of there's a board of evidence in this country, including by the late Chief Justice of our Republic, the first black Chief Justice of our Republic, Justice Mohammed, who made a very clear point somewhere in 1998 in Cape Town, that judges must ensure that they act in a manner that reinforces the confidence of society on their work. Because unlike the executive and the legislative arm of government, there is no police behind the judges. If the judge makes mistakes or blunders, it undermines our democratic system, because there is no other way you go to sanction judges and succeed in so doing. So our view is that we can't keep quiet. We are in the process of, we are undertaking this complex task of the transformation of our country. It doesn't exclude the transformation of the judiciary itself. And along the way, if the judiciary commits mistakes or it makes decisions which in our own view, as the National Liberation Movement, are not consistent with the values that must be nurtured in order to build a national democratic society, we're entitled to raise our concerns about that, and will continue to do so.
All right, Mr. Ntuli, I did mention a little earlier that I will not be alone in this particular conversation. We are joined by our senior politics reporter, Ziyanda Ngcobo, who was on the ground on the back of the events that took place in July. This is your opportunity, Ziyanda, to weigh in here, and you can ask Mr. Ntuli your questions. But mine to you has to do with whether or not we are going to possibly face similar consequences or similar issues that we saw in July based on the statements that are already doing the rounds right now.
You know, what I find interesting, Xoli, is that, you know, we've heard from the Justice and Security Cluster this morning saying that they've learned their lessons. We heard from Mzwanele Manye from the Jacob Zuma Foundation, and whilst everyone is saying we saw what happened in July, no one is coming out and giving outright condemnations, even including Mr. Ntuli this morning, or calling for, you know, restraint of some sort, given the fact that, you know, whilst they'll say, oh, don't apportion any blame to former President Jacob Zuma, they're also the same people who will say, yeah, look at what happens then when the judiciary acts in a certain manner. You cannot stop the ground forces from behaving in a particular way. So to answer your question, do we or can we expect a similar occurrence to what happened in July? It's anyone's guess. Yes, the Justice and Security Cluster is telling us that they are still learning their lessons, that the report by that task team looking into what happened in July is still well underway, and it is in the President's office. That is still not enough, I think, Xoli, to actually allay the fears and concerns of South Africans, given the fact that it is important to also note that we're in lockdown level 1, which means there's a lot of free movement. I mean, when we saw that unrest taking place, we were at a much higher lockdown level, so how much more when we're now placed at lockdown level 1?
Yeah, well, Mr. Ntuli, perhaps that is the question to you. Is there going to be a clear message on any threats of violence? Yes, we take your point, and I'm sure South Africans do, that judges are not immune to criticism. But the biggest worry for South Africans is the assurance that they need at this time. Already, businesses in KwaZulu-Natal, for example, there's a chamber there of commerce that is worried, and they're saying that we're still reeling from the July effects as the business community in KwaZulu-Natal. They need reassurance. Why isn't an unequivocal message coming out of the governing party in KwaZulu-Natal?
Xoli, as I said earlier on, We had a PC meeting from Monday until late yesterday. It's the first time that we have an opportunity to talk to the South African people, particularly people of KwaZulu-Natal, through the media platform. And of course, I was yet to say, as the African National Congress, we would not want anybody associated with the ANC or acting in the best interest of former President Zuma to instigate the province or anyone in the country into the situation that we're confronted with in July. We don't agree with that as the ANC. We never agreed with it at that time. We are also calling on the members and supporters of the ANC today not to take that. We can't go back to that trajectory. But it's not enough to say people must not do that. What are we going to do? There are a few things that we're going to do as the ANC. The first advantage in this regard is that JZ is not expected to go to prison tomorrow or tonight, which means that we've got time. We're going to use this weekend in our 3 regional conferences where our structures are going to converge to explain in detail that the ANC in this province, ultimately as the leader of society and the leader of the provincial government, has a responsibility to avoid anything that can lead us to what we experienced in July 2021. The second thing that we're going to do, the PEC said we will have to go down and engage our structures. We did that before under very constrained conditions, but we had to go out and say we can't work in this way. We can't allow an expression of unhappiness and anger towards the judiciary in a manner that was done. So that is the second thing that we're going to do. The third thing that we're going to do, we want to engage with the national leadership, to say to the national leadership, under the current circumstances, we think that the ANC itself must join this case as a friend of court. Because the ANC joined this case as a friend of court in support of former President Zuma, primarily because what happened in July ended up not being a responsibility of the court. It was appropriated to ANC supporters and ANC members. The crisis had to be managed by government and the political leadership of the ANC, nobody else. And our view is that we need to go to court and say, you may very well have taken this decision on the basis of your own consideration, which of course as a province we disagree with it. But we think, as we said before in July, you can't just make judgments and detach the work of those judgments to the contextual environment that we find ourselves as a country. I mean, we didn't have to lose so many lives totally in July on the basis of incarcerating President Jacob Zuma. There was no need for that. And we don't want any chaos, because that chaos in July did not originate because the ANC had wanted it to happen or called for it. It happened as it did. Now, we think we must not allow the country to gravitate towards the same kind of a challenge that we experienced in July without the ANC leadership playing a central role in court and outside court to persuade the rest of us, including the judges, about the tragedy that we experienced in July, which must never repeat itself in the period where we're in today. So I'm saying we've got time on our advantage this time around, and we're going to engage our structures and society in general. We do want to say to the business community and everybody else in KZN, they must be assured that the ANC-led government and the police and everybody else are on alert. We need to work together to avert the situation we experienced in July, because it really was bad. We lost lives there. Many people died. They lost their kids. I mean, people lost their daughters and sons, their fathers and mothers. It was a painful experience. Besides that, there was something that happened to business, which was in itself undermining the economy. But the loss of life fundamentally convinced all of us in the ANC leadership in KZN that this arrest of President Zuma was not worth what happened in July.
Mr. Ntuli, it would seem that you are admitting then that the ANC is once again deferring its own internal matters to the courts. You want to be a friend of the court in this matter. And there is a bit of a danger there, I think you'd admit, with now the politics being conflated with what happens within the judiciary. And then you now saying you want to engage your structures. Are you then admitting that in July you were caught off guard and that you failed then to engage your structures, given now the time that we're going into the impending return of the former president to jail, but also knowing very well that next year there are several conferences that need to be held, including that important elective conference in which KwaZulu-Natal, I'm assuming, would want to play an important role. So what exactly are you what message are you sending then by now saying you want to be a friend of the court, when in fact a lot could be said is as a result of the ANC failing to deal with political matters and finding your own political solutions without deferring to the courts?
Mr. Ntuli, perhaps before you answer that question, we are pressed for time, and so I'm also going to add my question to that of Ziyanda's, because I believe they are interlinked. On what basis would you want the ANC to join this case as a friend of the court? And the question simply is premised on the fact that the former president, the reason he is where he is today, is as a direct result of his refusal to go and answer for the alleged corrupt acts that took place during his presidency. Are you not defending the alleged corruption that took place during his time in the presidency?
Well, your question is very, very pregnant, and I'm worried that you are also concerned about time, because I would have wanted to unpack it a little bit. But let me try within the limited time we have. First and foremost, we are not abdicating our political responsibility to lead the nation. That is why I'm saying politically, the ANC this weekend is going to engage with its own structures to ensure that we use these structures as the foundation to provide leadership and guidance to society. When this unrest occurred in July, you may very well know that we were the only province that went out publicly and said the situation has reached a point where the law enforcement agencies on their own would not be capable to deal with the problem. The political leadership must be out, and indeed we went out. And subsequently, the government relaxed regulations a bit to allow that work must be done in that regard. And our view is that had we not did that, had we not done that, the situation was going to escalate even further, because you need the leadership in the areas where there's a problem to be visible and deal with those problems. Why do we think there's a need to join the case? Ziyanda also, I'll put this question, I'll answer this question together with what Ziyanda is asking, that aren't we conflicting politics with the law, or judiciary, which is supposed to be independent, and what happens in... Who took the matter to court now? I'm sure you would recall. It was the Democratic Alliance. Is that not a political party? I'm sure you'll agree that it is. That decided to go to court and challenge the decision of the National Commissioner of Correctional Services. It was a political party. And I know sitting here that that decision was not just a legal decision. It was a political decision, which is what you must explain to members of the insane society. It was a political decision in order to ensure that you deepen contradictions in case the case were to be ended in a way that it was ended today. You deepen the contradictions and leave the ANC almost in a crisis of having to account for what happens if KZ goes back to prison, but equally of having to take a responsibility that members of the ANC who support KZ and the rest of society are doing so in a manner that has made the ANC to lose control of the process. Now, that's why I was saying we need to go to that court ourselves as the ANC. If the National Executive Committee agrees, we know the NEC is meeting tomorrow, we'll put across this proposal. If the NEC doesn't agree, we'll accept that. But our view is that it can't be. You know, when the DA went to court, it was also supported by something called Helen Suzman Foundation, AfriForum. I mean, all of those ideologically inclined to an agenda that seeks to bring about the dissemination of the African National Congress. We want to go there on our own, to say to the court, of course, you must make all decisions based in law. But we believe that in so doing, you can't be oblivious to the consequences of your own judgment. I mean, if we've got judges that must only go decide what happens is none of their business, I don't think that that's a democratic dispensation that our people fought for. We're celebrating the 60th of MK today. It was never about creating a dispensation where there would be a segment of society which will take whatever decision it likes and leave the consequences to those who must contend with them while they are sitting freely somewhere. So that's a message that we think needs to be taken up to that court. Of course, including the legalities that we believe the commissioner was correct to say, based on these advices, I disagree with the Medical Parole Board, and I'm taking a decision to release President Zuma to go. We also do not understand Ntuli and Ziyanda. And this is my last point. We don't understand why does the court go as far as saying we no longer recognize the fact that you are incarcerated at home, still restricted. You can't even leave home to go and sleep in Durban without the permission from certain authorities in the state. But we're not going to count that in your favor. We want you to go back to prison and finish the remainder of the days. What is it that makes the court to make that conclusion? When the jurisprudence of this country, our dispensation, recognizes being arrested at home as part of serving your sentence. Why is our court extraordinarily go to the direction that seeks to say, we want this man to drive back to the correctional service facilities? Well, we don't think that is a correct, it's a rational decision to make. It may be a legal decision, but our own view is that it's not rational. It shouldn't have been made in that way.
Well, some will say, Mr. Ntuli, and this is not a question, by the way, we have to end this conversation now, but some will say that it is exactly what the ANC deployees in government have just said, that it is all about equality before the law. If a decision was wrong to release the former president from prison, which is what the courts have said, it's not us at Newzroom Afrika saying it, it's the courts. Therefore, I guess the matter has to be ventilated in court, but that's where we are going to leave this conversation. My thanks to the Secretary of the ANC in KwaZulu-Natal, Mdumiseni Ntuli, alongside my colleague, senior reporter Ziyanda Ngcobo. Thanks indeed for your time.